Okay, today I have a very special guest. His name is Tony Rolando. He is the big chieftain behind Make Noise Music, the people that make some of my favorite modular gear in the world. And he is involved in a lot of stuff. I'm going to let him kind of tell us about it. So with that, I'll introduce him. Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing this morning, Darwin?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day. I'm loving this fall weather with all the sunshine and stuff. We're having it pretty nice up here in Minnesota. How are things down in North Carolina?
Sunny but cold, but probably not as cold as it is up there.
That might be true. That might be true. Let's start off by having you describe what it is that you do, because I labeled you a chieftain already, which is probably a new one. I'm not sure I've heard anyone else call you a chieftain, so I've got that on my crown. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Well, I guess technically I'm the founder here at Make Noise, where we design and build synthesizer modules and now standalone synthesizers as well, and of course modular synthesizer systems. At one time, I did it all. I basically sat in a spare room in a house in Marshall, North Carolina, which is about 25 miles north of here, of Asheville here, out in the middle of nowhere. And I had days where I was working on designs, days where I was building stuff and testing stuff, and days where I was packing and shipping. At that time, which was about 8 or 9 years ago, I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would end up with my own office in a building in West Asheville with anywhere from 10 to 14 people working to do all those same things. So today I have people who work with me and help me with design, and people who work with me and help me with production and shipping and sales, the whole thing. And really, if you want to talk about who the chief is around here, that would be Kelly Kelbell. She's the one that propelled the business to where it's at now. She handles all the top level management, sales, and stuff like that. She hires, she fires. Really, at this point, most of what I do is development, and then helping the production line stay up and running. Because if you know anything about trying to manufacture something, you know it's not for the faint of heart. And then when you start trying to manufacture analog stuff, even the digital stuff that we make is still quite analog. There's a lot of knobs and buttons and jacks and stuff on it. So it's just a lot of parts on everything. There's a lot of places where things can go wrong. So every day is full of surprises on the production line, and I've got to be around to help smooth out those bumps in the road for the crew that's building and testing this stuff down there. So today, most of my work is split between development on one hand, and then keeping the production line, problem solving, putting out fires on the production line on a day-to-day basis.
I grew up in a manufacturing environment. My father was a QA manager at a place that made big metal farm machinery, which is a lot different from manufacturing modules and little standalone systems. Tell me a little bit about what your production system looks like. Do you have a whole pick-and-place system? Do you have all of that machinery in-house?
No. There was a point, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, where I was looking at doing that. And at that point, Kelly had just come on as a 50% owner of Make Noise, and she was going to start managing the business. And we had a chat about that, and she really felt strongly that would cut into my time doing development. And I think she was probably right. Friends of mine who've taken that route, such as Josh Holly up at Maleko and Will over at WMD, told me there was a good 2 years where they were basically getting their pick and place line set up and getting all that up and running. It's an art. It's an art to get a pick and place line running smoothly and to keep it running smoothly. And we really don't do the kind of volume that you need to make something like that worthwhile, which is why you'll also see Josh and Will now produce several of the other smaller Eurorack company products. I don't know the whole list, but I'm sure they'd be glad to talk to you about it. So no, we still use CMs that are based here in the U.S. We have one in Atlanta and one out on the West Coast in L.A., and we're in talks with a third one up in Virginia. we get all the job files all sorted and perfect, and communicate with them what we need, and they send us finished built boards. They just do it a lot better than we ever could. The place down in Atlanta it's top notch. I mean, they've got everything down there, man, and the lines run so fast. It's actually kind of a fun place to visit because it really kind of feels like you're watching a miracle take place when you see one of the boards built.
It's interesting, and I actually think you're fairly smart for not taking that on. I know I had the opportunity to go visit Will and see his operation in place, and it's fantastic. It's really an amazing thing he's put together, but then a part of the business becomes keeping the line full, by finding other customers, work, and stuff like that, and I'm kind of glad to hear that you've kept your focus on design. That seems really smart.
Yeah. No, and design and just keeping the rest of our production process running. That's the part I didn't really get into. Once these products land here, once these vendors deliver, for example, the finished boards, and then we have a shop in Metal Photo of Cincinnati, out of Ohio, who ship us the metal work, and a shop called Rogan that's just outside of Chicago, Illinois. That makes the knobs. All those things converge on 414 Haywood Road in Nashville, North Carolina. And we've got a crew here, those individual pieces, and builds them up into modules or zero coast and standalone synthesizers in this case now. And then they have to test them. And man, the testing is really, I don't think people will understand just how much time it takes to test every potential fail that could happen in a given module, every knob, button, jack, LED, and it really can. It takes quite a while actually on something like a match where you've got 20-something jacks and 10 knobs and 2 buttons. It's a lot. It takes a lot of time. So we still do quite a bit of work here. We just don't do the soldering unless there's a problem. When there's a problem, then it gets pulled off of the production line and it gets steered over to Devin, who's our technician. He does all the rework. Unless he gets stumped, then he might come up to my office and we might troubleshoot something together. But generally, he gets it, and then it goes back and starts the process all over again. Gets rebuilt back up and put through quality control, and hopefully makes it all the way over to that shipping table where it gets wrapped in some pretty pink bubble wrap and put into a white box that's stamped Make Noise. We have to have so many different sizes of boxes for all the different little modules that we can't make the quantities needed to get a custom stamped box affordably. So we still hand stamp all the boxes too.
Sure. Now, it's interesting that you talk about the testing process, because I imagine, especially something like the mouse, not only do you have to check to make sure the lights light up and all this stuff, but in something like that, you have to check to make sure that the ranges on all of the controls are, properly inverting or properly attenuating, that you're getting the right output levels and all that stuff. It was something like a maths. How long does it take from the time you have a populated board on a faceplate to the time that it's ready to ship? How much handling time is required to really do that?
It's funny. It's funny you ask that, because this is the kind of stuff that we've just started tracking, and this is kind of where Kelly is really kind of changing how we work here. We kind of got to this point where we had hired some people to help, and then we were still struggling sometimes, and so we hired some more people, and then we were still struggling to meet orders, and it kind of got to this thing where we had to stop and look and say, well, is it just that our order numbers are growing so fast that we just have to keep expanding the business, or is it that we're not working at full capacity? And so we actually just, I know it seems crazy, but we just started tracking stuff like that. That's part of what we're having. Our one of the newest members of our crew, John King, who's our production manager now, is actually tracking time from delivery to when it gets on the shelf, ready to go out as a finished product. On something like the maths, it's funny because we thought we knew how long it took, and what we realized is that when we were timing people, they work really fast. And then when you just get into the standard workflow of any given day of the week, things slow down quite a bit, because people are kind of settling into the flow and they might be chatting a little bit. And we do want it to be an enjoyable place to work, so we're not going to be cracking the whip all day long. And so that's where actually taking maybe a wider as you probably know, you got to collect data over a wider range of time and come up with an average.
Right.
Because our times were all wrong. Everything was taking longer than we thought it should have. But it was because we'd say, okay, we're going to time how long it takes to make a mass. And then everyone would just be working to make the best possible time. But then when we'd actually build, 20 or 30 mats on an afternoon, we'd notice it would take a lot longer. So we're still figuring that out, actually. I know it seems crazy, but this is one of the ways that we're growing. And the reason we're figuring it out is we're trying to figure out, do we need to hire more people or do we need to improve our process? Which I think is kind of an important thing to know. Is if you hire too many people, then next thing you know, you don't have enough work for them and you might have to lay one of them off. And I really don't want to have to do that because I've worked at places where I've been laid off and it feels terrible because you don't want to leave a job, but at the same time, you kind of need a job.
Right.
So we're trying to avoid getting into that kind of situation by tracking stuff and seeing, well, if we added one more person and one more test station, a test station might cost us a couple grand to add, to outfit it with a scope and a DBM and a test system and so on and so forth, and chair and all that stuff. Well, if we add this and this, then we could actually make our orders by this month or whatever. It gets pretty complicated, to be honest with you. It's not anything I ever thought I'd be thinking about, really. I got to be honest, it's just not. But luckily, there's folks like Kelly and John who do think about that stuff, and that's kind of where their skill sets lie. That's where they get excited about figuring stuff like that out. And so really, my work with them is more just pointing them in the right direction. Oh, well, we need to outfit a new test station. That gets me excited because then I get to buy a new oscilloscope, which everyone loves buying oscilloscopes.
That's great.
To answer your question,
it does.
I personally don't know, but I bet John knows. I bet John is working on a figure right now that he will, hopefully tell me about sometime soon.
It's interesting to talk about, because I come from this background, so it kind of, I still get a kick out of seeing stuff made, right? There's something, like you said, there's something almost magical about seeing stuff get made, right? But I also think it's useful to talk about, the realities of doing a small modular business, because you're kind of at this conundrum point. And I think a lot of people, within the modular community, you're one of the big manufacturers, right? You turn a lot of quantity of the work that you do in relative terms. Mm-hmm. But I think people would find it interesting that, even as one of the bigger dogs in the industry, it's still a small enough business that it makes more sense to stamp your boxes than getting them manufactured. And that you're actually not that far away from still building them on your kitchen table, right? That it's, it's that kind of industry still at this point.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's funny because I find that people either think, we get visitors here more and more often, and I find that people either think we're way smaller than they imagine, or we're way bigger than they imagine. It's rare that they come in and I think, oh, well, this is exactly what I thought it would be like.
Right.
Because, like you said, we are one of the larger modular synthesizer companies out there, but at the end of the day, our company is smaller than 15 people, which, as you probably know, coming from your background where your father worked QA at what was probably a much larger company, 15 people is a small company. I can still say hello to everyone in my company on the way in to work in the morning in under 3 minutes. Right. Really small company. And you're right. It seems really big to people who are in it because they're so excited about it, and they're in this Eurorack bubble where they're on the forums and they're on Facebook talking about it, and they think everyone I know is into this stuff. But the reality is, we make, I guess what dealers have told me is one of the most popular modules they've ever stocked, which is maps. There's still there's somewhere around 5,000 maps in the whole world. Uh-huh. The whole world. That's nothing.
Right.
The whole world of musicians. All the musicians in the world, there's a certain portion of them that play with electronic musical instruments. And that certain portion, we have 5,000 of them. And, then you're going to take into account the people who have 2 maps.
Right.
So the customer base is still pretty small when you look at it from real terms like that.
Yeah, or if
Yeah,
you take a look at it like, for a company like say Korg, making
right,
5,000 is like a hiccup, right?
right.
And so
Yeah.
it is a different it's a different leg of the industry, but certainly one that for those of us in the bubble is really exciting. Now you talk about focusing on design. Do you do the electronic design? Do you do the product design or both? And has that been the case all along? I mean, did you start off doing the circuit design or how did you
Yeah.
get into the design part of this? And what is that to you?
To me, design starts with conceptualizing, coming up with an idea for a module or for a synthesizer instrument. And so, to me, conceptualizing is the first step. And then after that, you got to get some hardware going. I've always done the conceptualizing. I write a description of operation. I do now collaborate with some people even on the conceptualization. So, for example, the work that we do with Tom Erb, I would say is more of a collaboration. So, for example, when we work on a module, I mean, sometimes I come to Tom and say, hey, I really want to make something that's like this, and it should do this and this and this. But I find that with Tom, he and I have such similar aesthetics that I often find myself riffing with him more than just telling him what we want to build. So in that case, in the case of those SoundHack Make Noise modules, I really feel like those are a collaboration in every way, both in the conceptualization of the instrument and then in the final product. So, for example, I would design the hardware and collaborate with Tom on the conceptualization. Tom would design the DSP algorithms and implement them. He would write the firmware. On other products, anything that's 100% analog, like the DPO, is pretty much just going to be, I'm going to conceptualize it and then design the hardware. And then, of course, also I'm leaving out one big important step is the beta testers. So in some ways, I feel like beta testers are a really, really important step in design too. So in that case, I manage beta testers, I guess you could say at this point. I have like 5 or 6 people on a product, and I'm just taking in their emails and kind of processing them and trying to figure out where the redundancies are and what's a real problem versus what's just a pilot error or perhaps poor design bringing upon us the pilot error.
Right.
And so in that way, I also feel like there's some collaboration with beta testers that we work with in the development of a new instrument. So yeah, I guess I do the hardware design and I do the conceptualization, but at this point, I think Make Noise is quite collaborative with the folks that we work with, like Tom Erb, our beta testing crew. Walker Farrell, who works for us, who does all of our videos, is one of our most important beta testers. He's usually the first level beta testing, which is some of the hardest stuff to do because that's when the product is just barely limping off the laboratory table. You know what I mean? It's just barely working, but we got to start testing it, and that's when we call on Walker. See, also another firmware engineer we work with, Matthew Sherwood, who we worked with on the Tempe and the MIDI for Zero Coast. He's also someone that we collaborate with a bit. It didn't initially start like that with Matthew, but he's gotten more into modular synthesis as time has passed. So I feel like he's been able to put more of himself into the work that he does for us than when he first started.
Okay.
He didn't really have background in modular at that point. So, but that's changing. He's using the stuff more, and he's just come to me sometimes with an idea. Oh, hey, what if we did this? And sometimes they're good, so we go ahead and we use those ideas. So you end up kind of collaborating with everyone you work with eventually.
Sure.
Even people down on the crew. Just yesterday, actually, Mike was running Zero Coast, and he found a bug in some MIDI firmware, and I got a call to come down the line and check it out. And so in that way, even the crew that's building this stuff is kind of collaborating. I always tell them, you're the last set of eyes on this stuff. You're the guardians of the sound. And what I mean by that is that I can't listen to and check every unit that goes out the door at this point. But that said, I do really want them to work and operate and feel and sound this very specific way. And so I'm going to teach you what that way is, and I want you to be the guardian of that sound so that when stuff leaves this shop, it still has that special quality that we need it to have. And they always have to have their eyes open, and they do. They find stuff all the time. So even the production crew is kind of collaborating in the finished instrument that people are hopefully enjoying out there in the field.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, and it really points to the idea of having a vision for what you're wanting to do, which is, I think, one of the keys to why Make Noise has seen the success that it has. I mean, there's sort of like a way that the products seem to be all part of a vision that's really compelling and really awesome to see. Now, I'm a little curious. One of the things I like to do in my podcast is talk to people about the backgrounds that they bring or their journey to where they got. And especially since you've come to this place where you have not only a company, but you've got this vision for a product, and it emanates in lots of different ways. The creation of the modules, but also the development of the shared system, and also the development of the Zero Coast, and also the development of the label that produces shared system recordings. All these things are part of a vision. I'm curious about, how did you get started in both music and electronics, and how did that lead you to this place?
I was initially just a musician that was curious about how stuff worked. Even when I was a kid, I was one of those kids that would open it up, whatever I got, open it up and see what was inside, even though I had no idea what I was looking at. I just wanted to look at it. And after a certain point, I think I had enough time on my hands to start maybe learning a little bit about what was on the inside. And I was actually living in New York City at the time, and I hadn't really found my place in New York City yet. It's tough in New York City. I think a lot of people could probably understand what I mean by that. You get there, and initially it seems like there's all this opportunity, and then you realize actually it takes kind of a while to really, if you don't go there with already having something set, it can take a while to find your place in New York City, to find your job, to find your friends, to find your places you like to go, all of it. I mean, it's just a very, very complex place to navigate. And I had gotten there and really felt kind of lost and kind of lonely. And my partner, Kelly, was already kind of set into motion with her life there. And so I found myself with a lot of time. And I started going to the Brooklyn Public Library and reading their reference library for analog electronics, which hadn't been touched much in recent years at that point. So all the books were there. They had the whole like analog devices library, a bunch of stuff by Bob Pease. It's really kind of a cool collection of somewhat outdated electrical engineering texts that just happened to be of interest to me because I was interested in analog electronics. Mm-hmm. And so I read the heck out of those. It helped that the Brooklyn Public Library is a very nice place to be. It's air conditioned well and heated well in the winter, AC in summer. It was just much nicer than my apartment in New York City. So I spent a lot of time there. And then I just kind of went for it. I just started trying to build stuff, for whole board, breadboards. I bought a cheap oscilloscope. I just started trying to figure it out. At one point, Kelly asked me what it was that where I was going with it, what I wanted to do. And I said, well, I really would like to work for either Moog or Buchla, and which is crazy to think, but this is a while ago. This is, right. Moog hadn't made all the stuff that they've made now. All they had at that point was the Voyager. So They were a lot smaller company. And Buchla was even less known than it is now. I mean, it's not well known now, but it was very obscure at that time. So it at the time, it seemed like a pretty achievable goal, to be honest with you. And it actually was, because I called Buchla and they weren't hiring. That conversation was quite quick. But I called Moog. I said, I'm looking for a job. I'm learning analog electronics, and I want to work for a place that makes synthesizers. The girl who answered the phone, who still works there, named Siobhan. She's a salesperson there. She's been there for many years. She says, well, we might be hiring. Let me ask our production manager, Lee. He gets on the phone. He asked me a few questions. He said, well, can you come in for an interview? Sure. When? And then I bought a ticket and went down there. And I interviewed and took a job working on the production line there. They were setting up to build little fatties, but that was gravely delayed. So I ended up actually working with Amos, who was also still there, doing warranty service and rework. It just kind of took off from there. I just learned a lot while I was working there. Not so much about how circuits work as much as how manufacturing works. like what it takes to make that analog synthesizer that Bob Moog designed 1,000 times in a row and have it be really good every single time.
Right.
It's almost as much an art as it is to design it in the first place, to be honest with you. And that's really what I took away from there. Seeing the folks in engineering at that time, which Cyril, their lead engineer, and who else was there? Stevie D, who's still there, who was the guy who designed the Mother 32. Seeing them work back then, Moog was quite a bit smaller. There was only 20 people there when I was working there, and it was really kind of a relaxed atmosphere. And I could just walk into engineering whenever I wanted and just kind of look over people's shoulders and see what they were doing. And I feel like I really learned a lot just seeing how they did what they did back in engineering, and seeing how the production line worked. Learned a lot about how to respect customers and how to deal with them and keep them happy. I think that's part of Moog's success, keeping customers happy. They had a good technical support program there. That led me to a point where I wanted to make modules, and at the time, modular it wasn't really very popular. So, when I talked to the folks at Moog about modules, they weren't really interested. So I had this dream of either getting into doing freelance printed circuit board design or making modules. I set off to try and do both. Of course, no one would hire me to design a circuit board because I didn't have a portfolio.
Right.
So making the modules was kind of an attempt to build a portfolio of printed circuit board designs I could use to get other jobs doing printed circuit board design. But then modular kind of started growing, and it seemed like that was the direction life was headed. So I let it take me that way.
What were the first module designs that you put together?
The first ones were really small, really simple, because I got to be honest with you, at that point, there was really only one place that people sold to, Analog Haven. Mm-hmm. And then a little bit after that, Andreas Schneider over at Schneidersboro. So one place in Europe, one place in North America. And so I would actually talk to those guys, more Sean than Andreas, but even Andreas, they would just tell me stuff that they thought they could sell or that they needed. Because at that time, we kind of felt like Dieter Doper had made the modular system. And all we were doing was just kind of supplementing it with the things that Dieter either didn't want to make or maybe didn't have time to make. So, the first stuff that I did was really simple. It was like the format jumbler, which was just something that Sean asked me to make because he said, I've got these guys that have Serge systems and they want to use their Doper system with their Serge system. So it really just changed cables so you could use banana jacks with a Eurorack system, right. And vice versa. The quad multimode gate, the low pass gate thing was an exciting one for me just because that was something I actually wanted to make. And then, Sean said, hey, the Doper low pass gate doesn't have that Buchla sound. It's good. It doesn't really have that sound. And so it'd really, be really cool if you did something that had more of that Buchla sound. I think people would be interested in that. So I started working on that, and I didn't want to just clone it. I didn't want to just make Don's circuit and Eurorack. So right. I spent a bunch of time trying different configurations and different feedback paths until I found something that was interesting and made the QMMG. So those are probably the first two that actually sold in any kind of numbers. There was the ring mod before that, but that was actually a birthday present to myself. Mod Gmod, that classic transformer-based, dial-based ring mod. I just wanted one for my Eurorack system, and so for my birthday, I bought myself 20 circuit boards from General Circuits online retailer, PCB Cart, who probably a lot of your listeners have used. And it was a birthday present to myself. I said, for my birthday, I'm going to make this little module. And I wanted 2 of them, but you know how it is, getting 2 circuit boards costs the same amount as getting 20. So I got 20. And I sold 18 of them and kept 2, and was kind of amazed at how fast the other 18 sold. So that was a pretty fun birthday present. And that makes Noise Off into motion right there.
Yeah, you kind of bought your future for your birthday present, which is interesting.
Kind of, yeah, kind of in a very strange way. That's exactly what happened. Yeah, completely. There was no designs on that, man. There was never a business plan. I mean, we're the closest to having a business plan today that we've ever been, and we still don't really have one. We're trying to make one. Business plans are hard. They take a lot of time. And then the whole time you're doing the business instead of trying to come up with a plan for the business.
So I'm curious about a couple of other things about the start. First of all, why Eurorack? Was it the influence of Sean, or was it that it was the thing that seemed like the most complete system, or is it just something that spoke to you size and interface wise?
Well, for a minute it was Eurorack or Frac. I actually have both. I still have some small remnants of my Frac system. Yeah, no, and it's funny thinking back on that. It was like, okay, wait, should we make this Frac too, or should I make it only in Frac? I mean, this was something that people actually thought about 10 years ago. I think for me, the thing that really moved me to try and make some more modules besides Doper. I did like Doper, and I had a lot of Doper modules, but it was the Harvest Man, who has changed his company's name recently to Industrial Music Electronics. But he had made what I thought was just the coolest module, because for years I had used, I can't remember what it was. It was like a plug-in environment that was kind of modular, where you could kind of tie things together with little wires and could load BST plugins and stuff. But there was a plugin in this plugin environment called the Decimator. And he had made a hardware decimator, an algorithm, and I thought it looked really cool, and I really wanted one, and I got one, and I just loved it. And I thought, this is what I want my company to be like. This, I want to do something that's a little bit on the fringe of what Dieter Doper is doing, which is admittedly already kind of on the fringe.
Right.
But I wanted to sort of supplement the Doper system with some really weird, strange ideas. And Scott was already kind of doing that. And so that sort of offered me a glimpse at how that could be done. Stranger graphics, colors, for example.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because Doper is about as plain Jane as it comes. And then all of a sudden, I remember the first time I saw the format jumbler, I'm like, what?
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, hey, if we're going to do it, let's do it in kind of an interesting way. Yeah, and Scott was doing that. The Malgorithm it was orange and black.
Right.
There was no color in the Doper system. So when you saw that Malgorithm next to your Doper, I mean, it was a stark contrast, and I think that really inspired me. It's like, yeah, this is really cool. This looks cool in the system. And then the other company was Plan B, Peter Grenader's company. I really liked his aesthetics as well. And I had gotten his Model 15 VCO, which I really liked.
Right.
And was about as close as I was at that point, as close as I was going to get to a Buchla VCO cord, aside from building it myself. So that was very exciting too. And then also there was Livewire, who, while they didn't have a lot of color, he did have a pretty neat aesthetic. The kind of old laboratory gear aesthetic that he had going on there. Those modules were pretty freaky too. So yeah, I think seeing those, really, honestly, it was the Harvest Man, but also, I mean, I guess I got to give credit to Plan B and Livewire too, because just seeing those companies making stuff to supplement the Doper system, because that's what we thought we were doing. None of us set out to make a whole line until much later. It was at that time, we're like, well, what hasn't Dieter done yet? Oh, maybe we should do that. Well, Dieter hasn't done a transformer-based ring mod. His ring mod's kind of clean side. Let's make a dirty transformer-based ring mod. Okay. So it wasn't until things started taking off that we really thought we'd make all the other stuff. I mean, we make a malt here now. I never thought we'd make a malt. Dieter already made a malt. Right. But then people were like, well, I want a malt that looks like my other Make Noise modules. Okay, well, that's a pretty easy job. We can do that. Sure.
Well, now, but it's interesting to kind of think about your planet sort of like aligning, but in opposition to the Defra stuff, because that actually does then, both for you and for the Harvestman and some of these other things, where the Defra stuff is really clean both in looks and in sound. A lot of you who started these early modular companies had a tendency to make messy things, right? The QMMG was messy. The stuff that the Harvestman was making was messy stuff, right? And I never really thought of that as being sort of like how you fill in the blanks of the system, but it makes perfect sense in that environment.
Yeah. No, that's I think you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah. Why make another? We don't need an analog VCO. We need a Malgorithm to make that analog VCO sound really completely sonically decimated. That's the thing that we didn't have.
So now a lot of your designs seem to be Buchla influenced without being Buchla clonish, right?
Mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
you've got, well, the Woggle Bug you worked with Grant, I assume, to bring that home.
Absolutely.
And the your DPO has got some of the sort of like complexity, but it's expressed in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Your filters, your envelopes, your VCAs, you have this strike thing always on your modules, which sort of really implies this Buchla orientation, but it's not. Unlike some other people who have taken that, you're not trying to in any way clone it. You're bringing your own take on it. And I'm wondering what
Mm-hmm.
was the influence that makes that Buchla sensibility work for you? Where did you get that from? But at the same time, what makes you need to do your own variations on it?
Well, I think working at Moog, with Moog instruments all day long, when we come home from work, I think a lot of times we'd be looking for something else. And not because the Moog wasn't great. The Moog was
Oh,
great.
I hear you.
The Voyager is a good instrument.
Yeah.
It's I think, there was a couple of things. I think for one, I think there was some music made on the Buchla that really spoke to me, just in the way that it was so freeform and so different than anything else that I had ever heard. And then also there was the thing of like trying to, the Buchla system wasn't so documented,
Right.
especially pre-internet times where you're sort of looking through books at the library on electronic music for any mention of Buchla, just to try and learn a little bit more about it.
Right.
So there was a certain mystery about the instrument and a certain intrigue because of that. It was just so different than anything else that I had ever come across. And I would literally just, I had pictures saved on my hard drive that I'd find on the internet of Buchla systems that I would just stare at.
Did you ever get hands-on time with them, or was it just looking at the pictures and imagining what they did?
Exactly. That was the thing. I mean, we didn't have a Buchla system here in Asheville. There was no Buchla system. There was no system for us to play. I mean, it was just more like I would just stare at these pictures. And there was a couple of other guys who worked at Moog that would sometimes get into talking to me about it. One of the guys, Aaron, that used to work on the little fatty line, we'd talk about the Buchla system a lot. And we'd just stare at pictures of it. And I would try to imagine, like, what is this knob doing? And I would think about some of the records that I knew the Buchla system was used on, and try to think about how these pictures of the modules corresponded with that record and how they were using them to make those sounds. It wasn't until quite a few years later, I was at a synth event in Chicago, one of the really early, synth events are pretty common these days, but at that time you had Analog Heaven would do events, and then the Trash Audio Crew, Urchai, would put on events in Chicago. And there was a guy who had a Buchla system in Chicago, and I got snowed in after that event. He said, "Hey man, as long as you're snowed in, you want to borrow this Buchla system for a few days while you're stuck here?" And so I said, "Hell yeah." And I said, this really nice guy, Rob, he loaned me this system, and I just got to play with it for a while. That was the first time I got to use a Buchla system. It was a 200E, so it wasn't the vintage, wasn't the original 200 series modules that I had spent all this time staring at photos of, but the spirit was still there. So I think it was just being completely intrigued by it and just wanting to know how those things worked, because I couldn't get my hands on them. And so that led to like breadboarding a lot of the circuits too. There was a few people who had somehow had complete collections of schematics, which I'm now informed by Mark Barabos that most of those schematics are wrong or contain grave errors.
Right.
But, it was enough to cobble together stuff on a breadboard to see, kind of probe around and see how they worked. And one thing I do a lot is I'll build a circuit on a breadboard and then take my scope probe and just look at all the different points in the circuit and see what it's doing at different points. To me, that's just a good way to learn how an electrical circuit works. So I do a lot of that too, just probing those circuits and just seeing like why does he have this cap here when he already has this resistor here? What's he trying to do with this? And trying to figure out what he was trying to do. I think by that time I must have been studying. I didn't have any interest in just like recreating it.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to take it and expand on it, I guess.
Well, and it's funny because if you want something that's inspirational, some of those Buchla front panels are that, because the naming conventions are all over the map, and so you could apply a lot of imagination to what you saw in the pictures.
Oh man, yeah, for sure. Like you look at a picture of the original 200 series, Source of Uncertainty,
right.
and I mean that would just set my mind reeling, man. I mean just the name alone, Source of Uncertainty. And then the little drawings and the hieroglyphs that are on there. Oh man, I mean, it really made me want to make music. So yeah, to try to capture that feeling in my heart and try to fill some of that in what we do here. Because while people probably wouldn't go down on record saying that Make Noise are the most accurate or precise set of modules out there, the people who do like Make Noise, I think, will be glad to go down on record saying that they find some good inspiration in them, and that's enough for me. That's what makes me happy to hear.
Sure. Now, when you talk about having listened to records that you knew Buchla synthesizers were on, what were some of those artists and records that were influential? Because on one hand, like looking at them and imagining the synthesis is one angle of it, but you also, I would say that your modules are very instrumental. They're clearly musical devices, right? Even ones that have very utility purposes. They seem very musical in nature. And so I'm curious, who are the artistics, who are the artists that kind of informed you about that? So like that put the sound in your head.
Well, the first one was probably the first one for a lot of people, Morton Subotnick.
Right.
I came across at a library record sale, when libraries are kind of ditching their records to get into cassettes or CDs. I found a pretty nice copy of Silver Apples of the Moon.
Right.
Also found some strange musique concrète records same day as well, 50 cents or something like that. And but that was when I was quite young, and at that point the internet wasn't really something that was available to the common person. They were probably using it in the military or on college campuses or something, but that would have been like 1988 or something like that. So there wasn't really a way to learn much more about it. Now, fast forward many years, and having spent a lot of time looking for mentions of Buchla or even Morton Subotnick in library books and whatnot, oddly enough, I was able to find quite a bit about musique concrète in some libraries that were available to me, which I've always thought was kind of odd that somehow Buchla and Morton Subotnick eluded me, but musique concrète, Pierre Schaeffer, and all that was somehow like very
everywhere,
well documented.
Right.
So I just got lucky and found a couple of really good books on tape music. But fast forward a little bit, and I actually had a great email conversation with Peter Grenader once, where he recommended. This is really early on, while I was working at Moog. He had recommended some records to me, and one of them was a record, Lost Atlantis by Barry Schrader. Mm-hmm. And that record just blew my mind. I mean, it was just the fact that it had been made on this Buchla 200 system had already had me intrigued, but just the sound quality of it and how it was composed, the use of both negative and positive space, the timbres that he achieved. I mean, it was hard to believe, for me, it was hard to believe that it was a record that was made back in the 70s. And it really made me believe also that the Buchla 200 series instrument was more powerful than I had imagined.
Right.
That was a big one. That Barry Schrader record was a big one. Of course, the Terry Riley, heard some of the Terry Riley stuff. And then once you start digging, you can start getting into, now there's a lot of really cool books out there that will talk about people like Pauline Oliveros and Raymond Sender, and it just kind of opens up to you nowadays because there's resources where you can go and you can find these people, and you can go and you can find their records and you can get them pretty quickly. Yeah, it kind of goes back to this original email from Peter Grenader, though, recommending that Barry Schrader record. That really set me off when I heard that record.
That's interesting.
Have you heard that one?
Like one time, I was over at Grant Richter's house and he played it. And he's like, "Oh, you got to check this out." And I was like, "Yeah, it's amazing." And then I never ran across it again. And it's quite a rarity, I think.
That's cool that you heard it at Grant Richter's house. That's so awesome.
Yeah, believe me, I've got some great Grant Richter stories. That's a fact. But
I bet, man.
he's
He's
a
he's 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 a special character, man.
that he
He's
is.
a cool guy because he's like the guy that held the torch for so many years between, when Don stopped making modular and was making MIDI controllers, and then Dieter started making modules and stuff. They have this guy Grant Richter who somehow has taken great interest in this stuff that apparently no one else in the whole world gave a damn about for about 15 years.
He gave me a hell of an education just by being able to set me in front of a system, a Model 200, and saying, "Here, check out this, check out that." It was such a mind altering experience to do that. So, that's amazing.
Yeah, I bet, man.
So,
Yeah, I bet.
let's talk a little bit now about some of the stuff you've done. First of all, it's interesting that given where you started, it's been only kind of recently that you've even put together enough modules where you could make a full system. So the shared system, you started producing those like a couple of years ago, right? A little bit after the
No.
DPO became available.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It doesn't seem like long ago, but I think that's actually about 5-6 years ago.
Jesus.
No, 5 years ago,
Wow.
maybe 5 years ago.
Well, that just tells you how time is flying for me, but there you go.
It is for me too. I mean, I'm always getting myself into this kind of trouble where I think something just happened, but it actually happened a while ago. The Phonogen came out in 2010, so that would have been when we made the first shared systems. Would have been 2010.
Unbelievable.
But I mean, you got to understand they were far and few between because getting the quantity of modules and the cases all together. So you're talking about maybe in 2010 we maybe made like 3.
Right.
And one of them was the one we sent out to people to make the records.
To make the records, right.
Probably, I guess 2011 would maybe be more realistic, I guess.
Sure.
Because really the first systems weren't something we really offered as a product. It was more like some musicians wanted a system, and I came up with that configuration, and then we decided to make the records for it. And then after we make the records, then we started actually offering them just on the website or whatever. So
Right.
I guess maybe 2011, I'm guessing. This is a great question. Kelly would know the answer to this question. She has a great memory for that kind of stuff.
Well, I think it's really interesting, though, that you came up with that primarily as sort of like a vehicle to put together this, what I would call an art project of taking this one system and sending it to people and saying, "Hey, can you make a record using this?" I think that's pretty interesting. First of all, it's probably something that your newfound manufacturing experts would say, this doesn't make sense, But
Right.
But it also, though, it really speaks to, again, sort of the fact that you've got a vision, and it's a musical vision, and having that done was really, it seems like a natural part of that vision. Did you do it on a lark, or was it actually something you had always hoped to do? Or was it something that people said, "Hey, why don't we do this?" How did you get into actually producing music?
Well, Suruchai, a good friend of mine, and I were in New York City, and we were outside of this bar. It was actually a cool place. You can see some cool shows there. It's closed now. But we were just talking about stuff we could do that would be fun. And we had talked about making records. And because Suruchai loves records. And I said, yeah, man, making records would be kind of cool, but we should make something, we should make some sort of a framework around it. And he and I just got to talking, and he and I just got this idea to ask 5 friends to make a record all using the same instrument.
Uh-huh.
And I said, yeah, like, they would share the system. And then we came up with the idea, we'll call it the Shared System Series and send this same system. And at that point, we didn't have 5 different copies of that system. We just had the one, like I said, and we didn't. So that's why it took so long to make the records. Like when we shipped it to Keith Fullerton Whitman, he had it for quite a while. So I think he had left the country for Australia or something. It was just sitting in his bedroom for like 4 months or something.
Oh my, okay.
But yeah, I mean, the idea was just sort of it sort of came about that night in New York City, hanging out with Serch. I was talking about how could we make records, but how could we do it in a way that maybe be a little more interesting. And you're right, it was kind of an art project. It was this idea of, well, here's a theory. Let's see if we can use the process of making records to prove it. And the theory was that if you create an instrument that's open-ended enough, the artist's voice could shine through the instrument. And because there's this sort of thing that's happening with electronic music where people, they want it to happen automatically almost. And it's almost like the software and hardware designers have as much control over electronic music as the musicians themselves. And the hope was that you would get 5 really unique records. And there was some concern, like there was part of me that thought, well, what if we get 5 records and they all kind of sound the same? That would be a great disappointment. But, you got to accept the outcome. But no, I think we did get 5 really unique records. And especially considering that most of these people didn't have the system for that long. They had to sort of just apply their general knowledge of synthesis to the system.
Sure.
In order to create something. Especially, I think Alessandro didn't really have much time at all for his piece. He was scheduled to leave out on tour for a while, and he really just had this short period of time to develop his pieces. So some of them had very little time, and still, I think, produced something pretty memorable.
Indeed, it's a incredible body of work. I think it's something that, if you think about the fact that we still, listen to the Subotnick records as like elemental things to listen to and to get inspired by, I think that you build something that kind of has that feel to it as well.
I think for the artists too, I think some of them like to go back and listen to it. I know I was talking to Richard Devine last week, and his record came up, and he said what did he say? I think he did like 27 hours of recording before he got the one he wanted or something. Mm-hmm. He came across some like other variation that he had almost chosen as his final cut. Was listening to it and just really enjoyed it, kind of going back and listening to that. And he was like, I was just thinking about, I used to have these like techniques that I was doing when I was making that record. And so now I'm trying to remember what those techniques were so I can kind of dig them out and start using them again. So yeah, I think it was a fun challenge for the artist too.
Sure. Now, the shared system is a fairly large and complete system with a lot of functionality. Recently, you've kind of gone the opposite way with your new Zero Coast product. Can you explain a little bit about what your thinking was behind that and how you chose to include the functions that you did on it? Because it breaks some conventions for Make Noise, right? And so I'm curious about a little bit about your thought process going into that.
Well, I mean, it's funny because so many people will say something along the lines of, I know it's called No Coast or Zero Coast, but it's really kind of more West Coast. And I think they're missing one really big point, which is the form factor in which it's been delivered is actually quite East Coast, you could say. Something that's sort of ready to go, ready to use with MIDI.
I was going to say keyboard oriented, which is very, very East Coast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, people so often they think of East Coast, they think of transistor, ladder, low pass, 24 dB per octave low pass filter. And, obviously that's a big part of the Moog sound, but the functionality of the Moog, I think, has as much to do with the music that was created with it as the sound of the filter. For example, the use of the 4-stage ADSR envelope as opposed to something like the 2-stage envelopes that were so common in the West Coast instruments from Serge and Buchla. Right there, I mean, playing a modular synthesizer with an organ-style keyboard with black and white keys with the ADSR allows you a lot more functionality than playing a Buchla instrument, for example, with an organ-style keyboard, having only the 2-stage envelopes. It just gives you so much more functionality. And it also kind of sounds a little bit more like the classic organ sounds, because the classic organ sounds had that really sharp, noisy attack percussion, I think they would oftentimes call it, followed by a sustain and a release. Mm-hmm. And so the Zero Coast has that. And I think really for me, I just wanted to kind of take the two worlds that I've been inhabiting, having worked at Moog for a while and spent so much time studying the work of both Bob Moog and then Don Buchla. I kind of wanted to see how the two of them could come together to make an instrument. And I didn't want it to sound anything like a Moog, and I didn't really want it to sound much like a Buchla, which is a little bit easier to do because most people haven't actually used a Buchla instrument. They think they know what it sounds like, but they don't actually. And for what it's worth, the Zero Coast obviously sounds less like a Moog than it does a Buchla, but it really doesn't sound like a Buchla.
Right. I haven't had a chance to actually have my hands on one, but a friend of mine sent me some recordings that he did, and it really did have unique sound. I mean, for me, this person had also done some stuff using like older Korg analog stuff, and it really had that kind of flavor to it, which I thought was really interesting. And so,
yeah, that is interesting.
But I wonder, it could just as easily be the fact that he's done it that way before with Korgs, and that's how he naturally approached this instrument. I think I like that. Whenever I find instrument builders who the way that they create the instrument invites people to bring their own voice to the table, I always find that really fascinating.
Yeah, and important, really. I mean, it's kind of an important part of a design. Right. If a design only allows for a limited range of use, then it's, in my opinion, it's not the greatest design. You look at someone like Alessandro Cortini's works on the Buchla system are quite different than the works of Barry Schrader or Martin Zabatnik.
Right.
And they're night and day, but they were created on the same instrument, which is what most people would consider a very quirky and strange and unique instrument to begin with. So the fact that you could have these artists that sound so different using that same strange, unique instrument, to me points to a good design.
Right. So I've already burned through my time. I appreciate you being patient with me. But before I let you go, one of the things I would like to ask is, what do you think the future looks like? And this could be any of the futures that you're interested in, whether it's the future of Make Noise or of modular systems or music tech or even music. I'm curious to know how you imagine the future looking.
Yeah. I spend so much time in the present. For me, I think I look, I just got my little nephew one of those Novation circuits. It's been interesting seeing how he interacts with that. I feel like kids, like when I was his age, we were using microphones built into a boombox to, record hammering on old beat up acoustic guitars or something like that. I mean, I just feel like the technology that the youngest musical generation is having access to is so complex right now. And when they actually get to an age where, I realize something like the Novation circuit, it comes with a lot of presets and ready to make beats, so to speak. It's literally the antithesis of what we do here at Make Noise. But the reason I got it for him is that I kind of wanted him to be satisfied. He said, I want to make beats. I thought, well, this is what people do to make beats these days.
Right.
And my hope is that by the time he gets to be a little older, he will kind of grown out of that and he'll be looking to explore more deeply electronic music. And having already worked with an instrument that is very focused on a sort of prefabricated type of music, I felt like if he could get that out of the way at a young age, by the time he gets to be in his 20s, he's going to be ready to break some new ground.
Sure.
I feel like a lot of young people have that potential because they're starting with iPhone apps and little hardware instruments that are so complex already that by the time they grow out of those, I imagine that they're going to need electronic music systems of complexity that we don't really even understand right now. I mean, look at even like Max MSP, for example. I mean, the number of people using Max now that it's been incorporated, and I understand it's not like using Max MSP, but Max 4 Live in Ableton Live. There's people using that 15 years ago never would have even thought of using a software like that.
That's true. Very true.
I feel like in just a short period of time, I'm going to be a dinosaur. I'm going to be completely outmoded when these kids get to that age. Right now, someone looks at the Make Noise system and they think something like the Tempi or the Max or whatever it is that they're looking at is so complex. But I guess I just wonder, I feel like in 10, 15 years, that's going to be the equivalent of a basic electronic instrument, the acoustic guitar of electronic music.
Right.
Everyone will learn it because that's where you start, but they're going to be looking for something even more complex. And I honestly don't know what that is. And that's probably the scariest thing about owning a business like Make Noise and having people who come into work every day and want to get their checks cashed at the end of the week. My job is to kind of figure out what that future is so we can keep on keeping on. But right now, when I look into it, I don't have the idea. The only thing I know is that it's going to be a lot more complex than we could ever imagine. Because we're kind of getting everything out of the way right now, man. They're reissuing all the old analogs, the MS-20, the Odyssey, the 909, the 302. Everything's getting reissued. So that stuff's no longer mysterious.
Right.
It's no longer mysterious. Everyone can get their hands on it, either in hardware or in software versions. Everyone knows how to program a 909 now by the time they're 18.
Yeah, that's become the new baseline, right?
Exactly. So if that's our baseline, if what was at one point for me, if that's our baseline now, in a few more years, the paradigm of modular synthesis, what was once a mystery to me when I was staring at those pictures of the 259 and the whole Buchla 200 system, potentially that could become the baseline next. And that will be, everyone will just work towards having a knowledge of 2-stage function generators versus 4-stage function generators and frequency modulation versus wave folding and so on and so forth.
Right.
I think it's entirely possible. And then where from there? I mean, that's not something that we know right now.
Right. True enough.
I don't think. Well, if you know it, man, dude, let's talk about it afterwards.
Well,
yeah.
Tony, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic talk and fantastic to hear about how you got here, but also to really get a sense and a feel for your continued excitement with doing this stuff. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate talking to you as well, Darwin. It was a good conversation.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Take it easy.
Bye. Many thanks to Tony for getting together and having the chat. It's really interesting to hear about his background and the kinds of things that he's done over the years and the way that he's got a vision for the future as well. It's really pretty exciting. I want to thank you to listeners for dropping in, checking it out. Hope that you enjoyed this as well as all of the previous ones. Go check the archive. There's plenty of good stuff there. As you can hear, the heater's on, the kids are yelling. It's going to be a great weekend. But in the meantime, you guys enjoy the podcast. I'll catch you next time around. Bye.